This video is sponsored by HelloFresh. HelloFresh delivers fresh quality produce from the farm to your door in less than a week, so you can enjoy the delicious flavors of the season right from home. This is especially great to break the monotony of eating the same meals over and over and try something new that's easy to make. Weeknights can be made so much easier with foolproof step-by-step recipes ready in around 30 minutes or less, and HelloFresh can be up to 72% cheaper than dining at a restaurant or even grocery shopping. HelloFresh offers veggie, pescatarian, and fit and wholesome meals to make it easy to stick to your goals with already pre-portioned ingredients that mean less prep time and an easier cleanup. If you're like me and one of your goals for the new year has been to cook at home more often, this is honestly quite great. They are also the first carbon neutral meal kit company and nearly all packaging is recyclable. This time I opted for the veggie box, and let me tell you guys, my best friend and I ended up making some salsa verde enchiladas, and the way we scorched those down was probably inhuman, but they were so good. And this is just one of those things that I'm probably gonna keep making because, again, it breaks the monotony of everything I eat on a daily basis, but I still get to cook this at home guilt-free. So if you do want to sign up to HelloFresh, you can go to HelloFresh.com and use code MelReads16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 free gifts. Is that a hair on my lens or is it in the viewfinder? Hello everybody and welcome to my July wrap-up. I am going to be discussing all the books that I read in the month of July, all the books that I've read recently. And listen, July was a really good reading month. I think I really rode a high of 5 stars and it was great while it lasted. I am unfortunately not in that high anymore. And I've been kind of struggling to read since, but you know, like the honeymoon phase had to be broken at some point. However, I had some really great reads. We're gonna talk about all 12 books that I read. I did talk about, I feel like, if not all of these books, then most of these books in videos. But even though I've talked about these in videos, I know you guys just like a well-rounded wrap-up, despite me already mentioning these in past videos. So here we are. It's gonna be some rapid-fire, quick-fire reviews for these books. And when I say rapid-fire, it's probably gonna be like 2 minutes per book, but it's fine. And like always, before I get started, do let a girl know down in the comments what you guys read in the month of July. Any amazing reads, any not so amazing reads. Do let a girl know all of that down in the comments so that we can discuss our reading for the month of July. And yes, let us get right into this wrap-up moment. Starting out with A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. Now this was one of my Patreon book club picks for the month of June. And like always, I end up reading one of my book club picks the month after. Just because that's how things are, and I have this toxic trait where I tend to finish one of the books the day of, before the live show. And you know what? It's a great time because this was a great time. I ended up giving this 5 stars and it really just reminded me of everything that I love about fantasy, and specifically how much I love fantasies that feel so original. I honestly never read anything like this in the past. It was exciting, it was intriguing, it had a mystery element to it. The writing was really whimsical and beautiful and very hard-hitting in the themes that it was addressing, and also just in the dynamics of these characters. And I just love how at the core of the story is really the theme of love and family and friendship and devotion, and I absolutely adored that and the way that the author executed it. So, synopsis time. We are set in the Isle of Cadence, which is riddled with magic, and within that magic, within this land, there are tons of spirits. Wind spirits, river spirits, anything you can imagine. It's very elemental, and although these spirits are very benevolent and they really do sort of collaborate with the people, it all goes astray when girls start disappearing. And so that is essentially the catalyst for our story, and that is where we meet our main cast of characters. We have Adara, who is the heiress of the East, and she knows that one of the few solutions that they have, or really one of the few ways to understand what is happening and really summon the spirits to get to the answers they seek, is to use a bard's music as a means of magic, as a means of communication. And she knows that the only person capable of providing what they need is Jack Tamberlin, and Jack has not been in the Isle of Cadence in a hot minute. He is in university, he is a teacher, and he has essentially reinvented his life outside of the Isle of Cadence, but he will be summoned back for this task, for this quest, to again obtain some answers. And then on the other hand, we've got a married couple. We've got Cedra, who is a healer, and her husband Torin, who is the captain of the guard. Now obviously, because Torin is the captain of the guard, I think his POV was super interesting because we really got to see the ins and outs of the politics of this world, and also just get a closer look at these disappearances when they happen firsthand. Yes, Truck. And then Cedra is probably the most emotional POV in the story. She is somebody who feels very deeply, and she is somebody who wants to constantly help in order to, again, obtain some answers and get some solution and resolution essentially to this whole mess that's going on. And particularly, I think seeing the dynamic between her and Torrance' daughter, who is not her daughter, but she treats her as such, she considers her to be her daughter, was honestly one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed. And I just love seeing the theme of motherhood in the scope of a fantasy book. I think it works really great. I think especially because I feel a lot of media, particularly again in fantasy books, tend to literally evaporate parents. And it's very hard to come by a book, I feel like, that deals with the theme of motherhood in very close quarters in a very emotional way, but not with missing parents, not with neglectful parents, but rather with somebody who would be willing to give her life for her daughter, even if it's not hers by blood. I absolutely loved that. And I think also her POV and Torrance's POV, because they obviously overlap a lot since they're married, I think was very domestic, but in a way that felt realistic and beautiful, but still very fitting of this world. And I love getting this sense of realism within the fantastical, because this book does feel very fantastical, but witnessing their marriage and their struggles and their willingness to communicate what is happening so that they can move forward with strength and love was honestly one of my favorite things in the story. I loved the mystery to this. The plot twists were really great. The magic system again was elemental. It was whimsical, and the writing just accompanied that elemental portion of it just so well. It was just a masterpiece in my opinion. I really enjoyed this. Let me just take a sip of coffee before we get into this next one. This was not it, and I just know people are gonna give me hell for it, and that is They Never Learn by Lane Fargo. Now, this book was very disappointing. I had been hyped up for this book. Everybody was claiming how amazing this book is, how the feminist portions of this book were absolutely out of this world, and also just how the mystery itself and the plot and the way that the story develops was just so amazing. And I felt underwhelmed on all of those fronts, which was very disappointing, obviously. I ended up giving this a 2-star, and I think there's several things with this book that I didn't really love. First of all, let me tell you what this is about. We essentially have Scarlett Clark, who is an English professor, but she's an English professor by day, and then she is a killer by night. A killer who particularly targets men, really horrible men at that, men who have committed crimes, but she knows that they won't be held accountable for anything. She knows that they will likely get away with it, that it will likely be hidden that they have done these things, whether because they have the resources to hide those things, or just because of the way that rape culture goes, and how women in these cases are often pitched as the villain of the story. Because we know how society works and how we hear these lines of, you shouldn't have worn that, or maybe you shouldn't have said that, or maybe you shouldn't have done this, or maybe if you would have done that differently, then things wouldn't have happened. But it really is not anybody else's fault but the perpetrator. And so she makes sure that that's handled and that there will be no excuses on anybody's end. And then the other POV that we have is Carly Schiller, who is a freshman in college, and we see her start attending the same university that Scarlett teaches in, and we see her make new friendships and really go into the depths of college life and everything that it entails, particularly I think in a social level. However, that being said, I think despite this book being framed as a super feminist story, I think it goes into radical feminism, where obviously the tagline of kill all men, men suck, men are this, men are that, women are superior, and it just kind of beats the purpose of feminism as an idea and as a movement, where really the idea of feminism is just equality and not necessarily superiority from one to the other. And so I feel this book really co-signs the idea of radical feminism to the point where I really wasn't enjoying my time, because although Scarlett has reasons, I suppose, to do the things that she does, she is very hypocritical in this book, and she ends up committing a lot of the things that she criticizes in men in society. One wrong does not right a wrong. That's just not how things work, but that is how she approaches life and how she approaches this sort of vigilante moment that she has adopted. Even though she has quote unquote reasons to do what she does, it still feels very bottomless to me. It just didn't feel right as I was reading this, I think. And also there was this huge disconnect between the two POVs, and at one point it does end up making sense. It was just like very uninteresting, and I had to keep pushing myself to read because at some point I was just losing interest rapidly. And not only that, but the biggest plot twist in the book doesn't even happen towards the end, like not even remotely. It happened super early on in the story, and I feel it also took away from the excitement of this whole moment because we found out so early and there really wasn't any other twists happening afterwards. And although some of us are in the business of supporting women's rights and women's wrongs, I do not support this women's wrongs. Book of Night by Holly Black was another book I read, and this is an interesting one. I think very rarely do I get to read a book just purely for enjoyment and just turn off my brain and not think as I read. This was one of those books that I literally just read for enjoyment, and I think that's why I ended up rating it the way that I did. The rating doesn't really reflect the content of this though, and that's something that I will say. I do not think the world building in the story is strong. I don't think a lot of the execution is strong. It was entertaining, and I think also just by hearing so many negative reviews about this book, I went into this expecting like the lowest of the lows, and I ended up rating it 3 stars. I think it was really enjoyable. It does deal with shadow magic, which I always find like super fascinating, but we essentially follow Charlie, who's our main character. Charlie grew up in a very unstable household with really unstable people, honestly, surrounding her mom and therefore surrounding her and really getting her involved in things that at the age she was, being so young, she should never have been involved in. I mean, she should have never been involved in those things ever, but she found herself doing so because of the parental adult figures that she had in her life, which weren't very positive. And so she grows up that way, and now as an adult, she reinforces those behaviors that she's had since she was very young. She is a thief and a liar and a con artist, but now she has sort of left that life behind, or so she claims. She is living with her sister, she has a boyfriend, and although life is not as great as it should be, she is kind of making the best out of it, and again, thinks that she has gotten out of this business, except that then she doesn't. And she discovers that there have been a series of murders happening and a bunch of mysteries surrounding this particular book called Book of Night, which contains the secret recipe explanation towards allowing your shadow to live outside of your body and have sentient ability without you being dead, if that makes sense. It makes sense within the scope of the book, but I don't know if I say that out loud, just out of context, if that makes sense. And there are many people seeking this out, seeking this knowledge to do with it what they will. And Charlie takes it upon herself to investigate this further and figure out exactly what's happening, again with her con artist skills. And I enjoyed this, surprisingly. Again, it was a fun time, and although a lot of things weren't fleshed out to my expectation, to my liking, I think I've just come to realize Holly Black is the queen of short and sweet books. You get what you get. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. Get your coin queen. But still, I found it fascinating. I found Charlie's backstory to be absolutely heartbreaking, but I think her resilience is something that shines really bright throughout the entirety of the story, and her reluctance to love, but also her need and want to love was also very present throughout this. I also really liked Vince and the mystery surrounding him. He is an enigma really at the start of the story, where even Charlie doesn't really know a lot about him, where he comes from, his past, who he is, and the way that that develops during the story I just found the most fascinating, and I loved all of the twists and turns towards the end, all of the reveals, how that connected to the plot, how that connected to Charlie, how that connected to Vince, how that just connected to everything, and how everything in the end like really did make sense. And so that part of this I really loved. I gave it 3 stars, and I enjoyed my time, and I will definitely, based on the end of this one, will be reading the sequel because I am fascinated to see how she's going to wrap this up, because I do definitely agree this does not warrant more than 2 books, especially based on the way that she has written this, but I am still curious nonetheless, and I will read. I will give a read. Yes. Funny you should ask. Listen, this was the start of something new. It feels so right, and now looking in your eyes, it really was the start of something new for me because I love this so much. I gave this 5 stars. I enjoyed my time, and y'all were right. I do not know how to read. Because when I read the synopsis for this, what video was it? I think it was for my mid-year freakout book tag. I said something completely different. I read the back and I said the synopsis, and what came out of my mouth was not in synergy with what the synopsis and actual plot of this is. So I apologize for that, but I knew how to read afterwards, and I read this and I loved it. So we follow Chani Horowitz, who is a journalist. She really does get the opportunity of a lifetime, it seems like, because she gets a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to interview Gabe Parker. And in this world, in this fictional story, Gabe Parker is the new James Bond. However, there's a lot of controversy surrounding his casting because he is not British. He is not British, and he really doesn't fit the mold of what James Bond represents. and because of that, she obviously snatches it up and it essentially makes her career. This interview, however, was not the norm. They did it throughout a few days, and really it didn't consist of questions, but rather a collection of moments that ultimately led Chani to write what she wrote. And again, that made her career, and they never spoke to each other ever again after having this weekend together, getting to know each other, and her deciding to write what she did for the article. And then many a year later, she gets the opportunity to do a follow-up interview. Since people loved her interview so much, it was still subject to a lot of critique, but you know, it was so successful, people loved it so much, and people just loved her voice and the way that she painted Gabe in this interview. And so she gets the opportunity to do it once more, especially with him coming out of rehab and really rebuilding his life, and at the present time of the book starring in a new movie that again deserves all of the media recognition and all of the press. She decides to take it with a lot of reluctance, but she feels like it'll give her the closure that she needs and maybe will heal some old wounds and find things out in the way that she feels fit, and see him once again for the first time in forever. There'll be music, there'll be fun for the first time in forever. Yes, that is what the book's about, and it was so good. I loved this so much. I loved the relationship between Chani and Gabe. I think it was awkward at first, but then it slowly started developing into this sort of, I don't even know, magnetic attraction, I guess you could say. It does develop really fast in the way that they meet, and they're instantly almost attracted to each other despite the awkwardness of that first meeting. But there really does seem to be this magnetism between the two of them, and I think it's mostly because Chani really doesn't see Gabe as anything other than human. And I mean, both of them are human, you know, there's a lot of internal conflict riddling both of these characters. There's Gabe, who is really struggling with substance abuse and keeping that very quiet, but also sort of repeating these cycles that he's already observed in his family. And then we've got Chani, who has always kind of felt inadequate in her job as a journalist, as a writer, and she has never felt like she has amounted to much, and she really doesn't want these set of interviews to really define who she is as a writer, even though that's obviously what people ultimately end up doing, because I think it's inevitable in these cases, even though it's not necessarily fair. And so I loved their own individual struggles, and in the end how they came together, and just also the assertiveness towards the end. It was really refreshing, because I think we typically get in the cycle of a romance book, you know, you get the meet cute, and then you get the development, and then you get like the romance portion of it when they're actually together, then you get to the miscommunication, and then there's the fallout, and then there's the makeup, and then there's an epilogue. And I feel it's very formulaic in that sense, and I love that this book just spent more time really developing these characters as individuals and how they connect with each other. And then towards the end, there is no miscommunication, there's really just assertiveness, because they're at a point in their lives, because you know, Gabe is in his 40s, I think, at present time, and Chani is also, I believe, around that age. You know, they're at a point in their lives where they each kind of know what they want, and they really won't let any iota of miscommunication to take that away from them, to take that opportunity away from them. And so I really liked the assertiveness towards the end of the book, and also the commentary on the film industry. I just think was really, really well done. You see these press articles and you see these puff pieces with all of these flashy titles and all of these untrue statements, but you know, the media does that a lot. They make up their own stories and all of their buzz titles that are going to reel people in to read despite it not necessarily being truth. And so we have that, and then we also have, through Gabe and his best friend, we get these moments of acknowledgement towards the industry and how toxic it is, and how it constantly wants to redefine and reformulate who these people are in order for the media to love them more, for an audience to be more obsessed with them. And it was just fascinating in the way that it was executed, and all of the pop culture references I think also worked really great with the story based on what it was dealing with. So tis a great time. I loved it. Throne of Glass was next. And listen, this needs no synopsis. Everybody knows what Throne of Glass is at this point. It's SJM. She's famous, infamous, some people would say. And listen, I thought I was going to enjoy this on a reread, and I did not. This is my third time reading this book. This SJM really is the queen of throwaway first books. And listen, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Throne of Glass didn't hit, and it didn't work this time around. It does feel like a very long-winded prologue for something that kind of sets up the story, but when you look at the grand scheme of things, when you get into into Heir of Fire, Queen of Shadows, Empire of Storms, so on and so forth, you do realize that although she sets a base here, this book, for the grand scheme of things, really doesn't do a whole lot in a way that it couldn't have been included in some other way in those later books, if you know what I mean. So it was a really frustrating reading experience upon a reread. I just don't think it's the most interesting of books. The writing also feels very young, and it feels very young because she wrote this book when she was 16, and you can tell it kind of reads like a fan fiction, even though it's not fan fiction, but it does have that tone as if you were reading a Wattpad book. I don't think fan fiction is the correct word, but Wattpad, you know how people have their original works, or fiction.net where people have their original works. It feels like that, where you would see this in one of those sites and just read it and binge it and not think too hard about it. Again, in the grand scheme of the series, having read everything else, it doesn't feel very exciting. The ships also were terrible in this, Kale and Dorian. It's either a prince who is the colonialist son, or you've got the captain of the guard who perpetuates the issue of colonialism in this book. So, you know, there's just like really not a great pool to choose from. I was really disappointed more than anything this time around by the competition aspect, because Selena, our main character, essentially has to compete against a bunch of other assassins and criminals to earn her place as the king's assassin. And so the competition element was very weak. It was very lacking. It was done, and that was it. There was really not a lot of tension. There wasn't a lot of execution on that end. It felt very repetitive. It just seemed kind of pointless. The audiobook helped me push through, and I read it pretty fast because of that. Ended up giving this 2 stars. And then we get into the blast of 5 stars, as I should, okay? Lore Olympus Volume 2 was read, and it was loved. Now, I know I said this in the vlog where I read this in. It's a weekly reading vlog, but I initially read Volume 1 last year, and I didn't really love it. It was not one of those graphic novels that I read, and my brain went, shit, I'm gonna recommend this all the time. It didn't, like, my brain didn't really do that, and I was very hesitant to give it a 5 star, but I think the last third was really what got me, and I was like, oh my god, this is so cute and it's so adorable. This is a 5 star though. This was really exciting, and I just love how the author navigates a bunch of different conversations whilst introducing some really great plot lines in this. So essentially this is a Hades and Persephone retelling, and that's kind of like the bulk of it. Something that I'd never seen addressed before in any fantasy anything, the disparities in age. Let's talk about it. Persephone, I think she's 18 or 19 in this volume, and Hades is literally over 2,000 years old. Like, this man's old. And so I love that he has his own doubts about that, where he doesn't want to feel predatory because of his liking of her. He doesn't want her to feel any sort of negative way towards him befriending her because of his age, because that's not at all what he's doing. And then also just the people surrounding him are constantly reaffirming, like, Hades, are you sure about this? It doesn't seem very right that you're going after a 19-year-old girl and you're like 2,000 years old, fucker. Like, literally just like back off, buddy. Like, it's fine. You go and get some coochie elsewhere. Gotta stand the conversation. Gotta love addressing that. And we all know they're gonna end up together anyway, but just the mentioning of it, and that really being a big strong point in this volume, I really enjoyed. I also think now this volume introducing the whole CEO could potentially date somebody within the company just adds a level of excitement to this, because obviously they've been befriending each other, but everybody around them has been like, no, boo, you do not. And then they're also dealing with their own separate struggles, you know, Hades and his relationship, and then Persephone really being attacked by Apollo. So, you know, there's all of these interesting things happening within the story, but now adding this element of she is gonna start working at, you know, the underworld and his company and all of this good stuff, I think is gonna make for a really interesting volume 3, and I'm really excited to see how that plays out. So this was a really good time. This was fun. 5 stars. It gave me everything I needed when I read it, and it really is a boost of serotonin, even with the conflict happening in this book and it dealing with some really serious things. Another short but good book before the coffee gets cold. I absolutely love this, and let me sip my coffee, which is cold, but it's cold on purpose. So let me just sip on that real quick. I love coffee. So Before the Coffee Gets Cold is a collection of short stories which all happen in the same place, a super old coffee shop which is set to contain some sort of time travel magic. Now, every single one of these stories is motivated by love and drive and resilience and grief in many ways, and also yearning for things to play out in a different way. And I think that's what I loved about this so much. much the fact that it felt so cozy and personal for all of these characters. And although they were short stories, we really got to understand the motivation for all of these characters wanting to go back in time and trying to rectify wrongs or trying to mend bonds that they'd broken in the past, or to further connect with people that they actually genuinely love and adore. And so there's this big sort of hanging cloud over the story of all of these imaginary what ifs, and the characters really wanting to see what would have happened if these conversations, if these moments would have played differently. And although obviously the rule of time travel is that, you know, whatever you do, you can't change your present, it does raise the question of what happens then if I do something that doesn't necessarily change my present, but it changes my present self's future. Is that something I could do? And so there is a tone of hope in this, and hoping that things get better, hoping that things again at some point will happen in the way that these characters once more yearn for. And it was beautiful. I loved this. At the core of this was again hope and love and yearning, and I adored all of it. And I also loved the rules of magic within this and how the author managed to establish all of that in a very quick way, where you enter this coffee shop and you can only really go back to the past by doing a very specific ritual. The person needs to have been in the establishment. You need to very clearly think about the day. You need to very clearly go with a clear intention in mind, and you must get back before the coffee gets cold. And so I love even how the title of the book is included into the story, and once more how everything plays out. I think it's very satisfactory. It was very emotional, very hard-hitting, and it truly is just the best book to read as you're eating your little empanada, your little pastry, and you're drinking your coffee or your tea or your latte. It's just a cozy book and I love it. And I'm ready to buy the second one and read it in an actual coffee shop because I think it's gonna be a vibe. Better of the Moon Goddess by Sulin Tan. Gave it 5 stars as well. Absolutely loved it. So you guys know I love stories with gods and deities included in them. This one was no different. Follow our main character Sheng Yin, who is the daughter of the Moon Goddess. However, people don't know that the Moon Goddess has a daughter and so she has been kept hidden all these years. Their magic is also something that they try and keep as hidden as possible so that it doesn't raise any red flags in any other communities, particularly in the Celestial Kingdom, and yet it ends up doing that exact same thing. And so the Celestial Kingdom arrives into the Moon Realm and they claim that there has been a higher level of magical activity that the Moon Goddess is not supposed to do because she just doesn't have that level of power. And so the Moon Goddess literally tells Xing Yan to flee, and she does that, and she ends up landing exactly where she shouldn't have fallen in, which is the Celestial Kingdom. And so essentially she ends up taking a secret identity of sorts. She still uses her same name just because people don't know that she exists, so therefore nobody knows her name, which is very convenient, but she does end up creating this false identity around herself. She is the stewardess, I guess, to the prince whose name is Li Wei, and they end up training together, you know, doing everything together from when they're young all the way to their young adult years. And you could argue that their relationship is very insta-lovey just because he kind of sees her and he goes, yes, I shall protect, I shall attack. I liked it. I loved it. I usually hate insta-love, but I think in this case, just because the writing was so whimsical and so lyrical and just so heartfelt, it made sense to me that he would feel that way instantly. Li Wei is just a character who loves very fiercely and who is very loyal, and he has a lot of internal conflict obviously because of who his parents are and all of these expectations that they have for him, and him sort of wanting to break out of these cycles and out of these expectations but really not knowing how to do so by defying his parents, earning their wrath. And so I think it made sense to me that he would sort of fall in love with the first person to provide him the solace that he needed, and vice versa. I think the relationship was really, really beautiful and I loved them so much. I'm team Li Wei till the day I die, okay? I love Li Wei so freaking much. And there's even more things that happen. Xing Yin ends up literally going into the army and training and really just seeking something out for herself that will ultimately help her mother. And so her purpose in this book is really to free her mother at all costs and find the best way to do so. And her sense of loyalty is beautiful. The loyalty to herself, the loyalty to her mother, to the people that she loves. But even though there is that sense of loyalty, I like the agency that the author gave Xing Yin, where she still is learning a lot about the world, a lot about herself, a lot about how things work, and she gives her the agency agency to make choices and to really grow within the story and to learn that love is a really important part of life, but love also doesn't rule all. And within love, you should be able to be your own individual self. And so this was so good. The audiobook was also phenomenal for this. We're almost done, people, I promise. Let's talk about one of my favorite books of all time. Hi! I loved We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faisal. I cannot wait to read We Freed the Stars soon. This just read so easily to me. And I think also the way that I paired this up with the Game of Thrones soundtrack was the best to read this. The beats, the instruments, everything just aligned so perfectly with the energy of the story, with the pacing of the book. It was just, I dare say, a perfect reading experience. We've got two opposing characters. On one end, we've got Safira, and she is the hunter. She hides herself as the hunter and doesn't display herself as the huntress just because of the very patriarchal society that she lives in. She really does not want to face the backlash, nor the critique, nor the shunning from society if they knew that she was a woman that was doing all of these amazing things for the land of Arawiya. And so on one end, we've got her disguised as the hunter, and then on the other end, we've got Nasir, who is the Sultan's son. He was raised to be an assassin. He was raised to be so from a very young age and to be the best assassin in the entire land. And the Sultan delegates two tasks for him. One is to kill the hunter, and the second one is to go fetch the lost Yawaraj, which is a book that is set to contain the way to return magic to the land of Arawiya, which is again where this is set in. And it is a land that no longer has magic despite being incredibly magical for hundreds of years. And so they were both tasked essentially to find this book in order to solve this mystery, bring the magic back, and just thrive, except that obviously he does have to kill her. These two end up overlapping in this journey, and their relationship blossoms into something so just chaotically beautiful. And I love how they are enemies to lovers, but I don't think they're enemies because they want to be, but rather because of just playing opposing sides. But when they get to realize what each of them stand for and who they are as individuals beyond the characters and these personas and these facades they put forth, they realize that there is a lot more synergy than originally expected. It is incredibly slow burn. They literally don't kiss till very close to the end of the book, which I really enjoyed because we spent the rest of the story really, again, blossoming that relationship, really developing it, and really going through the banter and the overprotectiveness without really knowing why they're protective, and then also coming to all of these realizations about love. Both of these characters have been people that have been really reluctant to love because love is often viewed as a weakness, and they have both faced a lot of pain through love. And so they both had to come to their own realization, to their own learned lessons that love is an empowering thing and it is not something that really life is worth living without, and that you are stronger with love, and that love is a fantastic motivator, and that love breaks and creates and it heals, and it has the power to do so much, whether for good or for bad. I think Safira particularly breaking all of these societal standards and expectations for women, and really at one point of the book becoming so fearless that she doesn't care anymore about what people think, and really claiming internally how she is ready to take what is rightfully hers as a strong, resilient, assertive woman, and that she is willing to take space. She is willing to be loud, she is willing to be strong, and she is willing to do all of these things without feeling any shame for it. And so I loved that. And Nasir too, there's a lot to say about him and how he is quite literally raised under all of these patriarchal beliefs where he cannot show any weakness, where he cannot do certain things because it is expected of him to be conventionally strong and to be a man and to, again, not love and not cry because those things are not accepted. And so a lot of his journey is realizing that those things are acceptable and that this is just a bunch of stigma that has been created by society and has been perpetuated by, again, the patriarchy. And all of the side characters too, I found absolutely incredible and hilarious and just added so much to the story. Particularly Altair, I absolutely loved him. He was like main character syndrome without being the main character. He was so funny. His banter was top tier. His side remarks were just out of this world. And I think he added like that fun and that hilarity to very serious scenes that were happening. And so it was just like a great contrast between like seriousness and then just being funny, which I loved. I keep doing that which I loved. I mean, I did. Tokyo Ueno Station. Let me just say, what a perfect example of everything a book can do in such a short amount of pages. I know I've said that before for some books, but truly 190 pages of absolute goodness. We follow our main character Kasu, who is a recently deceased homeless man, and he has been through hell and back for his entire life. He has witnessed a lot of things historically that have either directly impacted him and his life and the way that he made a lot of choices as he was becoming more and more adult. And then also his life is very much a parallel between him and the imperial family, particularly with themes of poverty and class and privilege. I think those parallels between him and the imperial family, particularly obviously the emperor and his son, Kasu and his son, were really, really heartbreaking because the inequalities are ever so big. They were literally like astronomical. And I think it's just something that we observe in society with this economic disparities that we see in a lot of different countries. And so it was really fascinating to see that written in the scope of a magical realism historical fiction. It obviously does contain a lot of historical fact, which I found super fascinating, not only about Tokyo Ueno Station, which is a lot of where this book takes place in, although it is not like the main hub for this book, because we do get to see a lot of flashbacks of Kasu's life. We really get to experience the station and the park adjacent to it, which I think was really interesting. It added this level of, once more, realism to the story, where we really get to observe these everyday situations, everyday conversations, which add to that city life feel, I think, when you read this, where it feels like you are, you know, walking through a subway station or you're walking through a train station and you're kind of overhearing all of these conversations taking place. And it was just so good in the way that it was executed. And at the bottom of this, it's really just a character study about Kasu and his life, and really this idea that in death he is no less or no more visible than when he was a homeless man. And it's just a very heartbreaking parallel that we get throughout the entirety of this book, really. And so it was really wild to experience something that is so action-packed. It seems like there's just so much goodness in this, so much amazing commentary, so much amazing everything, really, in such a short amount of pages. Like, I genuinely was astounded by how much there was to dissect, because I feel in the vlog that I read this in, which is my last video, it's a 48-hour readathon vlog, I feel like I spent so much time talking about this book and just you know, ripping it apart in a good way, but just breaking it apart and just analyzing all of these things. And it's again one of those things where you realize how much an author is able to do with just a very clear path of where they want to go with the story. It was just so amazing. And I remember I gave this 4 stars when I initially read it, mostly just because of the structure of the story. This doesn't have chapters. It is very erratic in the way that it's written. It really doesn't have a very distinct structure to it. It seems like almost we get all of these moments based on how Kasu is thinking them in the afterlife, because he is very introspective. It's really the only time that he's been able to be this introspective. That's why the book feels so chaotic in the way that it's executed, and I really do like it. But I can understand how that could be an experience that a lot of people wouldn't enjoy, because yes, it could benefit from some order, but I think that erratic nature to it is what makes it so special. So initially gave it 4 stars, and I'm gonna bump it up to 5. If we were villains, I don't even know what to say about this. I'm gonna keep this short and sweet. I DNF'd this book 50% in. It was not good. I did not enjoy this. It was not what I wanted. And I just gotta say, something is really, something's not right, really wrong. That's how this book felt to me. Very, very wrong. I need to stop. I've been singing all night. I need to stop. It's literally so late. It's about to be midnight. However, this book it made me so angry. It made me so angry because it was so bad. And it had no reason to be this bad. And as a thespian, I take full offense with this book being so boring and so bad because it had no reason to be. Theater kids are amazing, okay? Theater is phenomenal. It is a great source of release. It is a great source of creativity and collaboration. And I love theater so much. The pretentiousness of these characters is just astounding to me. So the plot of this book, we follow Oliver. He is in prison. He has been in prison for a while. He went to prison because of a murder that took place in his last year at this conservatory, which specializes in Shakespeare plays. Him and his group of friends were very notorious. They, you know, did their thing. They were all in class together. They all had these character archetypes that they would fulfill all of the time. They were typecast a lot. And then in the first 50% of the book, the typecast is broken, and that creates a lot of anger and animosity within the group. And so one of them ends up dying, and Oliver apparently takes the fall for it, and he is now in jail. But the detective in charge of this investigation back when it was happening has now retired, and he is yearning to know what exactly ensued. And he does indeed find out. I did not have the patience to get there, though I will assume it's probably something underwhelming just based on how the story was going. Nothing was interesting about this, which is very sad to say. It felt very lazy to me because the author just kept using big passages from Shakespeare plays instead of playing off Shakespeare but still doing her own thing. And so although this is an ode to Shakespeare, and that is very much understandable, I'd expect the author to take agency within that ode and do their own individual original thing without relying so heavily on somebody else's works. And so it felt almost like they were copying out of creating something wholly their own. And again, like, you know, admiring somebody that much and really loving a piece of work so much, it's hard to kind of create that separation, but separation needed to be had in this book, if I'm being honest, because all of these characters end up sounding the exact same. Nobody has a distinctive voice in this book except for Oliver, and he still does sound the same as everybody else. But the only reason why Oliver is the most distinctive is because he is the narrator of this book. Otherwise, he would just blend in with the crowd. And if it were not for specific, you know, this person said, or he said, or she said, or they said, I genuinely would not have been able to tell who was talking, because they all communicate through a lot of Shakespeare quotes, which, listen, you can quote one thing every now and then, but like, people don't be talking in code like that. Like, I don't walk up to my theater friends and I'm like, fuck me with a chainsaw. Like, sit her around and spin her like a goddamn pinwheel. Like, you know, that's like a one-off thing, but like, we don't go back and forth just like saying that. And so it was just off-putting to me. They were just so pretentious, and it just really felt like these people thought they were so great because they were into Shakespeare. And I just think this book oozes pretentiousness because of that too, and it was just not something that I enjoyed, to be quite honest with you. So I just really didn't have a good time, like, at all. And nothing was happening either, which was the other thing. Dark Academia is slow, and it can be slow all at once. It's fantastic. Gothic literature, chef's kiss, gotta love her. The only Gothic thing I wanted to happen in this was like for Richard to off them all, and that's the truth. That is the gospel truth. That's a reference. And last but not least, I read Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren, and we closed out the month a little bit rocky, if I'm being honest. not very taki taki rumba from Christina Lauren is all I gotta say. This book was just not good. So I did annotate some portions of it because I did ended up liking some quotes, and it was like a vibes in time, but overall I gave this 2 stars. I was so deeply disappointed by this, and I want to love this so hard. We have 2 best friends, Macy and Elliot. They met when they were both very young. They met because Macy's mother had passed away, and as one of her dying wishes, she left a list to Macy's dad saying, please, when Macy is growing up, make sure that she gets all of these things. And one of those things was to give her a break whenever she was overwhelmed. And so her father just decides to kick it up a notch and just get a vacation home where they would go every weekend, every vacation, every now and then. And they indeed do go there every once in a while. And that is where she ends up meeting Elliot, because Elliot is their next door neighbor. Now these 2 grow up together. They develop the biggest sense of codependency I've probably ever seen in a romance book. And then an incident happens that leads them to completely separate and not talk for 11 years. Now, present time, Elliot is an aspiring author and Macy is a pediatrician resident, and they coincidentally end up meeting up, and this man is adamant on, I love you so much. You're the one for me. You're the one that I want. Ooh. He just Danny Sukos it out, and he's like, you're the one that I want, boom. And he's, again, very adamant about that, and he is just actively pursuing her despite the fact that she is engaged. And she, again, is not very happy with this engagement, but she just keeps prolonging it. She just keeps prolonging the inevitable. She knows that her and Sean are not really compatible, and that they rushed into this engagement. Like, they literally dated for 2 months, and they said, put a ringer on it, put a ringer on it, put a ring on it. And so they get engaged, and Sean has a daughter, and so the whole daughter thing was interesting to me because at one point she says that she has a really good relationship with Phoebe, and then at one point she's like, I don't really know Phoebe, and like we really don't get like that along, like, you know, I'm just here because I'm with her father. And so it was very contradictory in that sense. And although Sean was very supportive as a partner, there were also things about him that as the story kept progressing were kind of off-putting. He starts out as super supportive, and then the more we go on, he's just like super indifferent towards Macy, which I guess is like breaking the smokes and mirrors of the relationship. But at the same time, why do we always have to make one of the love interests so indifferent towards the main character or so terrible to the main character in order to elevate and validate the love interest? Like, why is it that one always has to be the opposite of the other in order for us to fall in love with the love interest? Because I should be able to do that despite Sean being good, you know? So like, I just don't like that trope, and I'm tired of seeing it because I feel I see it all the time in media, in books, in movies, in TV shows, everywhere. And I'm like, let us just have for once a current relationship that is actually healthy and loving and that there's a lot of synergy in it, so that the past relationship coming in actually feels like a conflict to be solved, because it's not that easy, because it's been 11 years. You'd expect at this point they would have rebuilt their lives and just like gone on with it. 11 years is a really, really long time. And I think despite being best friends with somebody, there are so many changes that happen, even within the span of a week, a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year. Imagine 11. So you can't just fall back into or ease into a relationship with somebody that you haven't seen or talked to for that long. It's really just not realistic. And the author kept pushing that. Like, Christina Lauren just kept pushing that and kept going, this is the one, this is the one, this is the relationship. And I'm like, it's not, but you keep saying that, but it's not. Macy was also incredibly subservient to Elliot. It was like, Elliot's this, Elliot that, Elliot this, Elliot is my this, Elliot is my that. And although I could see how that could relate to people as something that is beautiful, it was just, again, off-putting to me that it seems her whole life revolves around Elliot. And granted, he also loves her very much, so that's not something we can deny, but it's just like, why? Like, why do we always have to put the female presenting main character in that position of just being the one who has to give up everything for a man? Like, what's up with that? And that is it for today, friends. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a massive thumbs up down below. And comment down below, again, what you read in the month of July, what your favorite books were, what your most disappointing reads were. Do let a girl know all of that down in the comments. And if we reach the end of this video, let's leave a sea, ocean, water emoji down in the comments for a river enchanted. Methinks that is a great way to go. And you can subscribe down below if you haven't done so already. Just methinks that this is a cool place to be and you won't want to miss anything. And if you want to support the channel further, I do have a Patreon. It's always linked down below. You get a bunch of exclusives in there, live shows, videos, a Discord server, a book club, buddy reads, friends, me, everything. You get all the extra cool stuff on Patreon, so I would definitely suggest joining us. Alongside that, you'll find all of my social medias if you want to find me anywhere else. And yes, I love you guys so much, and I shall see you on the next one. Bye!